Welcome to another episode of CCSD Earth Science. Today we're going to be talking about deposition. So far we've talked about weathering, breaking down the rocks into different smaller sized particles, and we've also talked about the different agents of erosion and how the erosion can move and transport the sediment. But today we're going to focus on what happens after erosion stops and that sediment is deposited. And depending on how it's been moved, the sediment will be deposited in different ways. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the deposition of sediment in water. And we have the first type, which is called horizontal sorting, which is usually going to happen when you have a fast-moving body of water like a river or a stream that hits a larger body of water, which usually isn't going to be moving. So when you have a river entering an ocean, it's going very quickly along, and then it hits that river, or it hits that ocean, and it stops. The best example I have of this is if you are ever on a water slide. At the bottom of a water slide, typically, they put a pool of water. And the reason for that is to stop you. All right, when you go down the water slide, you're going really fast, and you hit that pool of water, you stop really quickly, and then you drop. And if you imagine what it would be like if there wasn't a pool of water, you would just keep going, and that would be painful. So they put that pool of water there to stop you. And you are like the sediment in a river. As you're going down the slide, you're moving very quickly because the water is moving quickly, and it can carry you. But when you hit that pool of water, which is not moving, the water from the slide stops also, and it can't carry you anymore, so you get deposited, and so you'll drop. When a river enters an ocean or a lake, it's moving quickly, it can carry all of the different size sediment, and when it hits the larger body of water, it also stops very quickly, and it deposits the sediment at the bottom. So horizontal sorting, when that happens, the largest, roundest, most dense particles are going to get deposited first. If you imagine you're carrying a bunch of stuff in your arms and you're moving along, if it starts to get heavy, what you're going to deposit first is the biggest stuff. And so when the river is coming along, it hits the ocean, the larger particles will be deposited first. And then as you go out further, the particles get smaller and smaller. So we can actually look at different rock types and see if it's a smaller size particle or sediment, it was formed in a deeper ocean or deeper water environment. So that is a way for us to get an idea of where some rocks have formed. So this is looking at it at a side view, so you can see the sediment is getting deposited when it first enters the ocean, and then the smaller stuff is settling out later, further out into the water. And then we have a similar, this is a top view, and you've got the river entering the ocean right over here. And the larger sediment, again, is going to be closer to where the river enters the ocean, and then it's going to get smaller as you go out. And so that deposition of sediment creates a delta. It's this fan-shaped structure that's formed when rivers enter the ocean. So this is horizontal sorting. So you can see that the sediment is sorted horizontally across along the bottom of the calm body of water. Now we can also have something called vertical sorting. And vertical sorting, instead of the sediment getting deposited across, it's getting deposited vertically. And usually this will happen when you have something like an underwater landslide. Maybe there was an earthquake nearby, and it shook some of the sediment near a cliff, and all of that got mixed in the water, and over time that sediment is going to settle out, and it settles out by size. And so what you see is something like this, where the larger stuff is at the bottom, and then as you go up through the water column, it gets smaller and smaller. Now there are some size particles, like clay particles, that have such a low density that they can't settle out, they don't deposit, and so they just kind of float around in the water, and that kind of is what gives water a cloudy look. If you've ever been in a pond or you've been swimming in the lake and you are walking around the bottom At first it looks clear, but then as you start kicking up some of the muck, it gets really hard to see and it's not as clear anymore. Over time, most of that will settle out. It's the finer, smaller size particles that tend to stay in the water longer and will give it that cloudy appearance. So like I said, the water is going to sort it out by size, and so we call that sorted, when the same sizes are kind of grouped together. So again, you've got the largest, roundest, most dense stuff at the bottom, and then it gets smaller as you go up. Unsorted sediment, like we see from glaciers, is all mixed together. So you'll have big pieces, little pieces, all near each other, and that doesn't happen with water. Water gives it the time, and there's that resistance of the water that allows the larger stuff to settle out first and then the smaller stuff on top of it. So this is vertical sorting, and this is, like I said, when we have something like an underwater landslide, or if there's a flooding event that happens where there's just a lot of material entering into water, and then that settles out vertically like this. Now occasionally these sorting events happen more than once, or they'll happen frequently in certain areas, and that's where we get what we call a graded bed, which is when you have a section of sediment that's all sorted out by size. So there was an event that happened and all of the sediment sorted out. We've got the largest to the smallest right here, and then above it there was nothing. It was just calm water. But then later on, something happened again. You have maybe like an underwater landslide where sediment was kicked up again and was falling through the water, and that gets deposited on top of this. So this is pretty much solid. It's not going to be able to have stuff passing through it. So when this next event happens, the larger stuff will get deposited right here, and then it gets smaller again. So we can see these patterns where it's largest to smallest, and that's one event, and then largest to smallest again, and that's another event. And you can have multiple events all stacked on top of each other, especially if it's an area that is prone to flooding. When you have flooding, you've got very fast moving water that's moving lots of different sized particles, and then eventually that flood water is going to start to recede and the waters will slow down, and you'll get this event, or you'll get this graded bedding forming. So these are the horizontal sorting, the vertical sorting, the graded bedding. These are things that we see in water, because water, like I said, will allow the deposition to occur by size. Now, one last thing that I want to talk about is wind. Wind can also carry sediment. It's not very large sediment, but it can carry silt, sand, and clay particles. And when it does that, something you need to be able to identify is the direction that the wind was carrying or transporting that material. So the wind is going to kind of build up and push the sediment here, and then you're going to see a drop off. So the side that's a real gradual slope is where the wind is coming from, and then on the other side it kind of drops off, and that is going to be on that other side of where the wind is coming from. So, I mean, this could happen in either direction. If the wind was coming this way, then it would be a lot flatter here and then would drop off on the other side. So you need to be able to identify the direction of the wind based on how the sediment is deposited along sand dunes. So we've got water, sand, and I also have talked a little bit about glaciers. Glaciers, like I said before, are going to deposit sediment randomly. And there's going to be some more information coming later that will talk about specifics of glaciers and some different formations that they create as well.